You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into today's episode of KCSN Update, your daily Chiefs video and podcast from us here at KC Sports Network. Quick mention, man, I'm wearing the KC Sports Network hoodie. So comfortable, incredible for these frigid cold temperatures we're having in Kansas City. Started to warm up, but it's hoodie season. I'm always going to be wearing this hoodie. You're always going to see me in this hoodie because it's so darn comfortable. Go check it out at charliehustle.com. Search KC Sports Network in there. You can get one of these hoodies and a shirt. We have a shirt like this. It's in Chiefs colors as well. You can get that for yourselves. And super excited to be talking about this Chiefs-Broncos matchup. Not a whole lot to talk about on the field. Whole lot to talk about off the field. We talk a lot about the Nathaniel Hackett firing, kind of what's next for this Broncos organization, because that's a big story in Kansas City, really. You got to think about what's going on in the division, with the ramifications, what it means for the Chiefs, Russell Wilson, everything like that. There's a lot going on in Denver. Not a lot of positives going on in Denver, which is good for Chiefs Kingdom. So I do enjoy my conversation with James Merilatt from 104.3 The Fan in Denver. We sit down and have a great conversation. You'll hear that on the other side of our sponsor read, which is DraftKings. And I've got to tell you about DraftKings Sportsbook. And you guys, if you know me, you know that I love college football, the fans, the tradition, the glory. There's nothing more thrilling than college football. It's bowl season and the action is far from over. My go-to betting site is DraftKings Sportsbook, one of America's top rated sportsbook apps, not only for the NFL, but also for college football. There's a ton of games going on with DraftKings Sportsbook. You don't want to miss out this bowl season. And right now, new customers can place a $5 pregame moneyline bet on a college football team to win and get $150 in free bets if they do. Go ahead and sprinkle that K-State moneyline. Could be a little bit tasty, and it'd be nice to get $150 in free bets if they do end up winning. Plus, everyone can combine multiple bets for bigger payouts with DraftKings same-game parlays. The app is an incredible experience. If you're living in Kansas, got to download that app and got to use promo code KCSN. They've got such good lines. The live lines are great. The experience overall is just phenomenal at DraftKings. And here's what you got to do. You got to download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, use code KCSN. New customers place a $5 pregame moneyline bet on a college football team to win and get $150 if your team does. That's code KCSN only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See the show notes for details. All right, joining me now, James Merilatt. James, appreciate you hopping on from 104.3 The Fan in Denver. Lots going on in Broncos country right now that we have a lot to talk about. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. This is the second matchup of the season. I talked about, the schedule makers probably thought these two matchups between the Broncos and the Chiefs going to be a little bit more high profile than they actually ended up being, putting them so deep into the schedule. But, it's second to last game of the season, and Broncos coming to Kansas City.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody that thought the January 1 game would stay in the noon window in Kansas City, the 11 o'clock window here. It was at least going to be the afternoon game, right? And it would be Nance and Romo, or maybe it gets flexed into Sunday Night Football the second time in, 3 or 4 weeks that Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes would battle. Here they are, just another game on the schedule that, will be shown on Red Zone when the Chiefs have the ball. Not a lot when the Broncos have the ball would be my guess.
And we talked about before we started recording, there wasn't a whole lot around this game before the firing of Coach Hackett, obviously. And going into this, we were trying to think of things to talk about, matchups to talk about in this game. But it's especially tough too when these teams just played a couple weeks ago. It feels like we've exhausted all of the storylines to talk about. Nothing has a whole lot changed. But the news, it took me by surprise. I'm curious to you, James, kind of what your feelings were around it and around this news.
Well, at the beginning of the season, I was telling people, hey, if the Broncos struggle, there are going to be changes. And people thought I was nuts. They're like, no way. They're going to be more patient than that. Not going to be a one-and-done coach. And I said, well, it depends on how bad it is, right? Like, if they go 7-10 and miss the playoffs, maybe it's some assistant coaches, and because they had a very inexperienced staff. And so maybe they bring in some guys who have been there, done that to kind of help out Hackett. But if it's a total disaster, the new owners didn't hire Nathaniel Hackett. They didn't hire George Payton, the GM. So yeah, there could certainly be changes. And it's been a disaster from the get-go, from the opening game with the 64-yard field goal, the loss at Seattle, the first home game the following week, the home crowd was counting down the play clock. I mean, it has been an embarrassment and a disaster from the get-go. When they were 4-10, though, they're coming off of what I've called around here the moral victory against the Chiefs, right? Hey, we only lost by one score. Never mind the fact that they were down 27-0 at one point in that game. And then they beat the Cardinals with Trace McSorley, a third-string quarterback. And there was this momentum of like, all right, well, Hackett will probably make it through the end of the season. And if they can beat the Rams on Christmas, beat the Chargers at home in the finale, and just be respectable, another moral victory against the Chiefs, Hackett might stay. But the Christmas Day game was such a debacle, 51-14, never forced the Rams to punt. First time that hasn't happened in a Broncos game in 50 years. There was the fight on the sideline. There was the fight after the game. I think it was just a matter of, hey, enough's enough. This is not getting any better. It's getting worse. And they felt compelled, the ownership group, Greg Penner at the head of it, felt like they had to do something. Very long-winded way for me to say, wasn't surprised because it needed to happen. But until, the trigger is eventually pulled or finally pulled, you're never quite sure. So it was what I've told people is the Broncos' loss on Christmas was a gift. It was a gift. They needed to move on from Nathaniel Hackett. It made that abundantly clear to everybody. So it was time.
And what's really interesting to me is I didn't really have a Hackett firing on my radar, right? And until I talked to Benjamin Albright a few weeks ago, and he's like, he doesn't think he wasn't gonna be back next season. I think for me, the fact it came in the middle of the season was again kind of added to that layer of surprise. But as you mentioned, everything that could go wrong went wrong in that game against the Rams for the Broncos, and it got to the point where I was like, I don't know if he makes the plane ride home. I think they might leave him in LA. It might be the point. And then it was a tough one to watch, especially, as a Chiefs fans usually take enjoyment in that, right? Especially after the Broncos had kind of owned the Chiefs for a little bit when they had Peyton Manning. So, we kind of soak this kind of golden era of Chiefs football up a little bit. But that one was just like, it just hurt to see, hurt to watch.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And Broncos fans kind of have felt like that about the Raiders back, maybe a decade or so ago, where, that's along with the Chiefs, that's the hated rival. But when the Broncos were so good with Peyton Manning and the Raiders were so bad, it wasn't even fun to pick on them anymore, right? Like the rivalry is only fun if you feel like it's somewhat competitive. And the Broncos have turned into that team for the Chiefs, right? I mean, it's just like, man, at some point, you almost hate seeing your nemesis get embarrassed that bad because it doesn't make it as much fun when you get to beat them. It's like, well, everybody beats them. Right. But yeah, there have been several times this season where you're watching the game and you're following everybody on Twitter, and the sentiment is, I don't know if they'll let him on the plane. They kept letting him on the plane, and he kept rolling back out there. Probably the one that was the opportunity to make the change was at their bye week. But it came after the trip to London. They won that game against Jacksonville to get to 3-5. So you're like, okay, well, they're kind of still in this, right? I mean, you look at the way the league, if you can get it up to 500 and head into December anywhere near that, you're in the hunt. So had they lost that Jacksonville game, they might have made the move then, but that saved him. And most people thought it was going to save him for the entire season, but it was one thing after another. I mean, on our website, we put together stories of, the moments that led to it. He only coached 15 games, and there were probably 20 different things that happened. It's like, man, how can you have that many mistakes and that many disasters in such a short amount of time? But, I think they wanted it to work out with him because he really is a good communicator in front of the team, by all accounts. Great presenter, kind of has a way of bringing things to life. I think they saw a lot of positives with Hackett, but two things derailed him. One, he put together a coaching staff that was his buddies. It looked like the group, the list you put together for the golf trip to Cabo, right? Like fun, but not necessarily who you want to surround yourself with. And if you contrast it with Sean McVay, when he first got the Rams job, he brought in Wade Phillips as his defensive coordinator, a guy that's got all kinds of experience, very seasoned, kind of help him through some stuff. This was a staff that everybody on the staff, it was the highest job they'd ever had. So, okay, that's a recipe for disaster. And then the Russell Wilson thing in two different ways. One, it eliminated any runway. He had no room for error. Expectations were high. If Drew Lock was their quarterback this year and they were 4-11, people would say, great. They're going to have the number 3 overall pick. They can draft a quarterback, and we'll see what happens. But once it was Russ, it was like, okay, it's playoffs or bust. And then he gave Russ way too much say. He looked at Russell Wilson as his lottery ticket, and it was anything but that. So, and once you kind of let that genie out of the bottle, he couldn't put it back in. He couldn't reel back in, letting Russ run the show. And when you get in front of a microphone in front of the media and say it's all about Russ, that's not a good thing. And that those were ultimately the items that undid him.
Yeah, I think the Russ signing in hindsight, the trade, the signing, it kind of the combination of the two was the doom of Nathaniel Hackett. You're right. He was a first-year head coach. They didn't give him any runway to kind of grow and learn into that role. And you saw it the very first game. The time management wasn't there. The clock management wasn't there. They brought in, Jerry Roseberg to do the clock management, time management. Now he's the interim head coach. And it's one of those things. It's just like, it doesn't feel like any of the staff is going to be here. It just feels like it's all borrowed time at this point, these last 2 games of the season. So what are kind of the expectations for the rest of the season?
Well, I mean, none. There are none. Jerry Rossberg had his first press conference today. It was a 23-minute rambling mess. I mean, it was tough to watch at times. He has no chance to be the head coach here next year. So it's not even like the players are trying to impress him. I get it. They're auditioning for 32 teams every time that they step onto the field, and the film doesn't lie. But you know what? They were on Christmas Day in LA as well, and everybody was watching that. They're the only game on at that point, and that didn't motivate them. So I think the expectation is that Sunday is going to be a total mess. And the following week here, I mean, they probably will get flexed into the Saturday slot in the final week because it'll be a game that means nothing. The Chargers could put one on them too. So it's how bad is it going to be this week, and how many no-shows are there going to be in the season finale, because that game's here at Empower Field. That's the expectation. It's the other trick with the Russell Wilson situation of you don't even have a young quarterback that you can trot out there and say, well, let's see what the kid can do, right? Like that's normally what you do when the season is lost, and they don't even have that. So the expectations aren't much, and I think it's kind of a matter of, well, how ugly can this get?
That's the thing I wanted to talk about too. We hear the news Derek Carr is going to get sat. They're going to play Jared Stidham. The Broncos don't really have that situation. They got Brett Rippon as their backup quarterback. You're not going to sit Russ for Brett Rippon, especially at this point in the season. So it's one of those things. The Broncos have clearly committed themselves to Russ, and I think I saw a quote that they said that they do think Russell Wilson can be fixed. So we're probably going to see a lot of Russ Wilson, I'd assume, in these next 2 games, and see kind of what he can do. And I'm very kind of intrigued, not only in the coaching position, but George Patton up at the GM position. Like, the guy who's brought a lot of these guys in hasn't got off on a great start. And I don't, do you think his job is in jeopardy?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, yesterday when Greg Penner and George met the media to talk about Nathaniel Hackett getting fired, we also found out that the new head coach will report to Greg Penner, not to George Payton. So it's a matter of, okay, well, they're restructuring the football side of the operations. They've taken a lot of the power away from George. That tells you a lot. I think he's still employed because you don't know who the head coach is going to be, right? So let's say they hire, hypothetically, Jim Harbaugh. And Jim Harbaugh comes in here and says, well, I want this guy as my GM, kind of like Kyle Shanahan did when he went to San Francisco and said, I want John Lynch. Well, then George is out. If they hire Dan Quinn, he and George have a long relationship. They get along. They've worked together before. They would probably be in sync. So then it's like, okay, well, then we'll keep George. And I don't think that's a, willy-nilly way to look at it. I think that's just the smart way to go about it. You can always replace your GM in a month. You don't have to do it right now. So I think it's a flip of a coin if he's the GM after the draft. He'll probably survive till then. Maybe it'll happen once they name a new head coach, but do I think he's a lock to be the GM in the 2023 season? Not by any means. I think it's a flip of a coin at best.
You look at this job and kind of what it entails, this opening. It's not very attractive. It's not a very attractive job for a lot of up and coming coaches, a young guns. Maybe it looks like maybe a guy or a coach who wants to retread the tires. He wants a guy who can maybe get back in the head coaching game. Eric Bieniemy is a name that's been thrown out there. Leslie Frazier possibly is a one as well. Who are guys in Denver? Who are you guys kind of talking about as that vacant head coach opening?
Yeah, and everybody seems to be thinking it's going to be somebody with previous coaching experience. So the big four probably are Harbaugh, Sean Payton, Dan Quinn, Frank Reich. Those are the four that come up a lot. Leslie Frazier falls into that category. There also is this notion that, hey, this is really the new ownership group's first big decision, right? That they want to make a splash. They weren't even here for the Russell Wilson trade. Now, they were the ones that signed him to the big contract, but they'd been the owners for a week at that point. So that was more George Payton just saying, hey, this is what we got to do, and then signing off on it. This is their first big move. So I think it'll be a splash. You know, they have basically endless resources. They could write a check to Sean Payton for whatever he wants. I get why I think from the outside people look at it and say, hey, this isn't a very attractive job. I think it's more attractive than people think. I think the fact that you have an ownership group that it's the wealthiest owner in the NFL. So resources aren't going to be a problem. You know, there are only 32 of these. There may only be 3 openings, right? Right now it's Indianapolis, Carolina, Denver. Well, Carolina might keep Steve Wilkes. He's been pretty good, especially if they make the playoffs. Arizona could come open, right? Cliff Kingsbury could be out there. But it's hard to come up with another opening. Now, there could be the weird ones. McVay may retire. Belichick could retire. Tomlin could walk away in Pittsburgh. Who knows? But we could have 3 openings. That makes the job really attractive because, you know, there's not a lot of chairs there when the music stops. So, and I do think there are going to be some people who are going to look at it and say, Russell Wilson can be fixed. You can find stretches of the season where he was really darn good. Was it for a full game? No. But he had an 11 out of 12 first half in Vegas against the Raiders. He was 10 of 10 in the first quarter against the Chargers. Again, you got to have a bigger sample size than that when you're supposedly a future Hall of Fame quarterback. But it's not as though he's completely lost it. The Broncos have to find out, was it a Hackett problem or a Wilson problem? Right? And it's the old scientific method. You got to change one variable at a time so you can figure out what the problem was. Hackett was the easier thing to change. They owe Russell Wilson a lot of money. You can find head coaches. You can't always find quarterbacks. So I think there's going to be plenty of people out there who look at it and say, hey, storied franchise, deep pockets, and a quarterback that I can come in and fix and be the hero. I think it's a more attractive job than people think.
I think it's very fair. Sometimes you just look at it from just the surface level of, well, you now owe Russell Wilson $270 or so million, and you're kind of pigeonholed into that playing this guy. You can look at it that way, or you can look at it the way that you're looking at it, of just the resources and everything, because I didn't even think about the ownership group being as wealthy as they are. That's a good angle.
If you look at it and say, hey, Russ is cooked, he can't play, then yeah, it's not a very good job, because you can cut him, but you're going to have a $40 million and a $60 million cap hit the next 2 years. So you're signing up for fighting with 1, maybe 2 arms tied behind your back out of the gate, which does not make it very attractive. So yeah, that's the big question. And look, I've been a defender of Russ, but on Christmas, he was terrible. I mean, that's just as bad as I've seen a quarterback play. So at some point, you know, you got to be honest about it, even if you're a defender of him. And there are a lot of things he's been doing this year that he needs to get away from, of, you know, having his own office, having 6 parking spots, you know, his entourage is walking around at the facility all the time. He has his own quarterbacks coach. Like, how is that going to work when the Broncos coach is telling one thing and his own quarterbacks coach is telling another thing? Like, it just doesn't work. So whoever it is has to come in and say, hey, Russ, you're one of 53. Here's your locker. Here's your quarterback's room. Go be a player and stop being an executive, a coach, or whatever else you think you are, because it's not working.
Yeah, I heard that was kind of the big thing, is he couldn't connect. You've heard stories even when he was in Seattle about wanting to go grab wine and sushi, not grab beers with the boys. Is kind of just a little disconnect there with Russell Wilson. But I do think, to your point, I do think that there is still something left in Russell Wilson. I don't think Russell Wilson is completely gone. You just got to get the number one, the right system, the right guy to get it out of him, everything of that nature. But let's talk about this matchup, because on the field, this matchup, it's probably not going to be the most exciting matchup on Sunday. It probably won't be. And there's going to be a game that the Chiefs fans are probably more attached to on Monday when it comes to the Bengals and the Bills playing on Monday night. They're going to have their attention to that game. Chiefs still have to take care of business against the Broncos. What are kind of, I don't want to say expectations, but what's something that you're looking for in this game? Maybe matchup wise, on the field, off the field, whatever it is. What's something you're looking for in this matchup?
Well, I think one of the main things is, and again, it's that moral victory game from a couple of weeks ago. But I am interested to see, well, what was more real reality? Was it the 27-0 deficit the Broncos were in when Travis Kelce's laughing on the bench? Or was it the fact that they outscored them, 28-7 after that?
Yeah.
And if Russell Wilson hadn't gotten hurt, right, he got hurt going in to cut it to 34-28. The Broncos got the ball back twice after that, but Brett Rippon couldn't move it. It was 6 plays and they were done. If they get it back with Russell Wilson and the way he had moved it in 4 consecutive drives, who knows what happens, right? Like, it's easier said than done, but at least it would have been interesting. So for me, it's like, well, which of those was closer to reality? I think it's the 27-0. I think the Chiefs took their foot off the gas, and we've all watched enough sports that once a team does that, it's kind of hard to get it going again. And they were hanging on for dear life at the end. But I think that's an interesting thing. The Broncos have had trouble covering tight ends, and particularly Travis Kelce, for years. Last week, Tyler Higbee looked like Travis Kelce against the Broncos. So, how many yards and how many touchdowns will he go off for? And then can they find some way to contain Patrick Mahomes? They've had a pretty good defense this year. Their pass rush hasn't been great, but the last game they did force them into 3 picks in the second half. That helped the Broncos get back into the game. So can they contain him and or force him into mistakes? I wouldn't bet on it, but those are the things heading into the game that I'm looking for.
Some really phenomenal plays from Josie Jewell, I believe, is who made 2 of those interceptions. He played really well. A couple of the throws too, Patrick Mahomes just missed on. Made great plays by the Broncos defense. I still think the Broncos defense is really good. And from the Chiefs' point of view, a lot of fans focused on the 28 points that they allowed, that the Chiefs defense allowed. And they said, well, that's the most that the Broncos have scored in so-and-so games, or most they scored all year. I can't remember what it was up to that point. But then most I'm sorry. Then you flip to the other side of the coin, and Chiefs score 34. That's the most that the Broncos had given up all year on the defense. So there's 2 sides of the coin, obviously, as you can look at it. I am curious to see too, kind of how the Chiefs play. From a Chiefs point of view, they're playing 2 teams now in this last part of the schedule that have nothing to play for. That they only can play spoiler if they want to, and in the Broncos case, why would they even want to play spoiler? That doesn't benefit them at all. I guess to end the streak that they have, the 14 straight game win streak for the Chiefs. But that's kind of one thing I'm looking at is just, can the Chiefs just play clean? As you mentioned, the 3 interceptions. That was a weird game for Patrick Mahomes. It was a weird game for the Chiefs offense, and they were kind of out of sync. They didn't have Kadarius Toney. They didn't have McCole Hardman. They're going to get hopefully both of those guys back on the Chiefs side of the ball, but I think that's kind of the big thing that Chiefs Kingdom is looking at is cleaning everything up, being healthy, getting out of there with a win.
Yeah, and you see this a lot with teams in various sports, teams that perennially go deep in the playoffs. At times, they almost seem a little bored with the regular season, right? So if it's not the Bills or it's not Sunday Night Football or something to kind of get their attention, maybe they're a little bit lacking in concentration, right? Like, so you're the noon time slot, hardly anybody's watching. You're playing a Broncos team that is circling the drain. Maybe they take them lightly, but like, that's the point the Broncos have gotten to. You have to hope for something like that. We did see it though. Once they were up 27-0, I don't think Mahomes makes those mistakes. If it's a close game, if he's totally dialed in, that turned into a laugher and he's just out there, having fun and kind of trying to make some plays. And, he had the highlight. I think it was Jerick McKinnon that he had the highlight throw to that turned into a touchdown. He was just trying to, see if he could get on SportsCenter twice instead of once. And I think that's a lot of why those mistakes happen. So maybe there's a little bit of overlooking going on. But the Broncos literally have nothing to play for, right? They don't have a young quarterback they can play. If Ejiro Evero had accepted the head coaching job, maybe that defense is looking at it like, hey, let's go out and ball out, and maybe we can help Ejiro get this job. We love this guy. It's Jerry Rosburg. He's a guy who wasn't even here at the start of the season. He's it doesn't really interact a lot with the players. He's in charge of game management stuff. So he's up in the booth and he's, doing math, as he said today during his press conference. So there's not even that of like, let's win one for Jerry. That ain't happening. So there really is like no motivation for the Broncos in this other than, hey, you're a pro, you play for pride, and you want to put it on tape. We'll see what that translates into.
I just looked at our friends at DraftKings Sportsbook. They have the Chiefs listed as 12.5-point favorites. If you were a betting man, James, where are you putting your money?
I would take the Chiefs minus the 12.5. Now, the fear would be some sort of backdoor cover.
Yeah.
But there'll be 2 touchdowns up for most of that game.
We did see it kind of last week as well with the Chiefs on the Chiefs side of things, where they only allowed 3 points to the Seattle Seahawks. They allowed a touchdown. They still ended up covering, obviously, but they allowed a touchdown to the Seahawks and Geno Smith late in that game, which made the score look a little closer than 24-3 instead of 24-10. But we'll see. Another divisional game. Everybody thought, man, this division was going to be a little bit more competitive than it was. Kind of disappointing. As kind of from a Chiefs fans perspective, I want the division to be close and competitive. That's a lot more fun when you've got these games all the time.
You know what I mean?
I know
you're bored with winning the division every year.
Exactly. What was it? I think it was 7 straight this year. It's just like, we beat the Chargers twice. The Chargers didn't even give us a run for it, and yeah, it's
you said it. People in Kansas City are more interested this week in Buffalo and Cincinnati because that's turned into their 2 rivals. That's the team that they had the great game against the Bills last year in the playoffs. They get upset by the Bengals. Those are the 2 teams that, if you're being realistic about it, could stand between the Chiefs and the Super Bowl. That's what's turned into the rivals because nobody in the division, even the Chargers, nobody in the division has even given them a scare. So, it's been disappointing. Certainly been disappointing from our side. That's for sure. Enjoy it while you can. We were this way when we had Manning. Enjoy it while you can.
That's what we gotta take it back and take in everything we got about Mahomes. I heard this stat earlier. We have a show called 10 Things. BJ Kissel, the owner of founder of our company, gives basically 10 stat nuggets from like the previous games from the Chiefs PR department. Patrick Mahomes holds the top 4 seasons in passing yards already, and he's in his 5th season technically because he started the last game of his rookie year for the Broncos. Insane. To think about. Just it's kind of sad to think about in some regards of like the Chiefs haven't had a quarterback to have that good numbers in a long time, but Patrick Mahomes killing it right now, front runner for the MVP. Do you think he's a front runner for the MVP? I want to get an outsider's perspective on it because obviously in Kansas City we think he's the MVP. We've heard some Joe Burrow chatter that he could kind of backdoor his way in, especially if he has a big game against Cincinnati or against the Bills. He goes 300, 3 touchdowns. Beats the Bills, beats the Chiefs. In the same breath, you could say that he could be the MVP, especially with 9 straight wins in the season.
Yeah, I think Mahomes is the favorite. I think part of it will be determined by which of those 3 teams gets the number 1 seed, right? Yeah. Like, if the Bengals get the number 1 seed, and after starting 0-2, then Joe Burrow's got to be, at the top of the list, unless Mahomes ends up with numbers that are just so crazy that you can't ignore it. He breaks, Peyton Manning's yardage record or something like that. If the Bills end up at number 1 and Josh Allen has a great last couple of games, he could springboard back in there. So I'm not trying to dodge the question, but if I had a vote, I would probably pick the quarterback that out of those 3 teams, and they're the 3 best teams in football, with all due respect to the Eagles. If you're the quarterback that's able to get the number 1 seed in the AFC, I think you're the MVP.
It's going to be interesting. I think Jalen Hurts had a very good conversation to be the MVP before he got hurt. Patrick Mahomes putting up a very good statistical year, something that we haven't seen probably since 2018 when he put up wild statistics in 2018 that probably won't be replicated. But going to get an outside perspective on the MVP race because we sometimes get so trapped in this echo chamber of Patrick Mahomes should be the MVP. I think the Joe Burrow discussion is very interesting about just kind of taking his team 9 straight wins. He's obviously, if he does beat the Bills, he would have beat both Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, 2 other guys in that MVP conversation. So I think that's kind of a big kind of swinging point for him. It's a very narrative and, a driven award. You got to have narratives going into it. I know we talk about Russell Wilson specifically. when he was with the Seahawks. We talk a lot about Russ has never received an MVP vote, but he's been so good. It's a good front half of the year is always what Russell Wilson would have. And then back half, when the narrative started to take over, other guys would outperform him, or he just wouldn't have the narrative to carry him there. So that's going to be really interesting to see, especially in these last 2 games of the season where the Chiefs don't play anybody. They don't play anybody that's going to be tough for them. They play 2 division rivals, but those 2 division rivals have seemingly given up on their season.
Well, and they're buried on again, not to keep harping on the fact that they're the noon game, but they're buried in that slot. Everybody's watching the Bills and the Bengals. So if one of those quarterbacks goes out and throws for 350 and 4 touchdowns, that's going to change perspective. The other part of it is, and I don't mean this disrespectful to Joe Burrow, but it's a little bit like when Charles Barkley and Karl Malone won the MVP instead of Michael Jordan. It's like both of them were worthy of it based on their numbers, and their teams had really good years. And it was also the fatigue of, gosh, it's this guy every year. So, okay, the Suns lead the league in wins. Let's give it to Charles. Everybody knows Jordan was better than Barkley that year. We saw it in the finals, but it could be a little bit of that too, of like, hey, it's been a lot of Patrick Mahomes. Not that he's won as many as Jordan, but you know what I'm saying, of like, hey, fresh blood, guy from the Bengals. When's the last time a Bengal won MVP? Right. And it's a little bit more fun to write that name on your ballot.
Absolutely. And I think one of the conversations that we had too is when you look at the the Hurts ballots, there's going to be a lot of people who have Jalen Hurts up top, or who have Joe Burrow up top, or have Josh Allen up top. But number 2 on all those ballots is probably going to be Patrick Mahomes. They went to the point system now, so it's looking like, I mean, Vegas has him as minus 500 favorite to win the MVP. A lot of those ballots are going to come back, and the points are going to be to Patrick Mahomes. Looking at his regular season passing yards right now, 4,720. It was a conversation at the beginning of the year that maybe he started off on a blazing hot pace. That he had to average like 320 yards a game for the rest of the season. There was like 8 or 9 games left, and he would have broken that Peyton Manning record, but it looks like he's going to be off the pace of that. He's got to play 2 incredible games, and he also has an extra game too.
So got an extra game too. Like to me, he would need to break it this week for it to be legit.
Right. So we'll see how that all goes. James, I appreciate you hopping on, talking some Chiefs Broncos with me. No, it's not the most exciting game that's on the week. What is it? Week 17 now schedule.
Yep.
But nevertheless, I'm glad you joined me.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. Anytime.
All right, that is going to do it for today's episode of KCSN Update. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the like button if you're watching this on YouTube. Follow us wherever you're listening to the audio platforms. Leave us a 5-star rating and review if you do feel so inclined. Those really do help us out. So on Friday, BJ Kissel will be back with Trevor Sigma from Pro Football Focus, getting his 3 key matchups for this game. I'm excited to see what Trevor has to say from that. So until then, we'll talk to you later.